Hey, before I kick off the podcast, I just want to shout out Next Door Clothing. Next Door, a clothing brand based out of Bondi in Sydney. They're making really nice jeans and shirts and hats. So go and check out their full range at nextdoorsydney.com. They're also artists, so you can go and check out a range of art. They put on rad parties, and I love what they're doing. So nextdoorsydney.com for the full range. Hey, it's Shan here. This week, I speak with past guest, psychologist, jiu-jitsu enthusiast, and all-round nice guy, Mr. Mark Baxter. We're joined by exercise physiologist and artist Melissa Errey, and we just have a really great conversation around mental health. So the journey of this podcast has been interesting for me because I never really started out to be like a mental health awareness podcast or anything like that. I just want to hear people's journeys, people's stories. And I guess obviously out of that sort of grew, people talking about their mental health, because mental health is dynamic, just like your physical health. It needs to be managed constantly. And there's often talk about the pandemic or the epidemic of mental illness. You hear statistics being thrown around about increasing rates of depression, anxiety, and other disorders. And you can't help to think that maybe the world's getting sadder. I don't know. Mark has been a psychologist for over 18 years. He runs his own practice, which is very popular, to the point where he's expanded and now trains other psychologists to work with him, because he's just so passionate about being of service to others. He really wants to help at a deep level. He's looking for solutions to problems based on recurring themes that he sees in his patients and in his office on a day-to-day basis. He's a professional, but he's also, in a way, I see him as more than that, somewhat of a, like an artist, trying to, really find solutions and problem solve. I don't know if artist is the best way to describe it, but it sort of sums up his level of passion with what he does. It's beautiful. Now, Melissa Errey is with us because she curates an awesome art festival that happens in Wollongong every year. It's called the Sporulation Psychedelic Art Festival. I'm releasing this episode a few days earlier because I want to support and promote this festival. We talk about that a little bit, but predominantly what we delve into is the role of psychedelic-assisted therapy. It's sort of, I guess, big talk. There's a lot of discussion around it. The Australian government has changed its scheduling, so it's being slowly rolled out to be accessible for various types of therapy. Mainly focused at PTSD and maybe treatment-resistant depression. But this is where Mark really weighs in as the professional that he is to clarify and maybe dispel some myths around it. He also breaks down why he believes that it does have medicinal qualities, and in a very responsible way highlights, possible harm and gives us some harm minimisation things to consider as well. And it's a good message. He's just a good dude. I've always liked him. I loved our first episode. I can't remember what it was. It was back in between 50 and 100, around that range between that range of episodes. So go back and listen to it. And we delve more into, Mark's personal journey in that one. So yeah, it's a good one. And if you get a chance, go and check out the Sporulation Psychedelic Art Festival. There's some keynote speakers and just some good humans, so you might learn something. So as always, dedicate this episode to my children like I do every episode. Enjoy. Terrible happy talks. Terrible happy talks.
Yeah, good to be here, man.
Whoa.
Good on purpose.
Go. 3, 2, 1. All right, let's do this. So where are you from originally?
So I'm from Sydney originally. I grew up in western suburbs down in Mount Bloody Druitt.
Yeah. Wow.
And, yeah, I've lived in a few different places, but I've been down here in Wollongong now for about 28 years.
Nice.
So I think I count as a local now.
I reckon.
Yeah.
I reckon.
Yeah.
What was your childhood like in Mount Druitt?
It was pretty interesting because, in a sense, my family wasn't from there. We sort of moved into it from out of the area. So you've kind of got that sense of, people that are from there, through generations, and then people that move into the area. And so my parents were a bit atypical in that, they read books and, and were educated and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of had that influence in my life.
Educated on a tertiary level?
My dad was, yeah. He was a psych nurse, as they called them back in the day.
Okay.
Yeah. Mum did actually go to university a bit later in life to do marketing.
Cool.
Yeah, so it was really mixed because it was a bit rough.
And it's got that reputation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's like a lot of those things, what people see from the outside, it never feels that bad from the inside because you know it and you're comfortable.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it was idyllic, but it was not like, this terrible, terrible childhood. Yeah, but I guess probably the challenging thing there being that, mum and dad ended up divorcing, and so there's the whole growing up in a single-parent family and all the challenges that go with that. Yep.
Do you mind if I ask how old you were when that happened?
I was about 7 or 8, yeah.
It's a pretty developmental time.
Yes, yeah. So, and I think the other thing too is that I always struggled with, trying to feel like I belonged, because I didn't feel like I belonged in my family in a lot of ways, and I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere in school.
In your family?
Yeah, I think.
Did you not identify with your parents' personalities, characteristics?
My relationship with my mum was always a very difficult one. Whereas my dad was, he's not my biological father. He adopted me when I was about 5 years old, but he'd been in my life from when I was a baby. And I actually bonded with him very strongly because he actually is a very paternalistic and very caring kind of person. And
It's a win.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Isn't it?
He saved me as a human being, I think.
Oh, that's so rad.
Yeah, because my mum was a very difficult person. She had her own, mental health and other sort of struggles. And so it wasn't just me that had a difficult relationship with her. She was just one of those people that was difficult, for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So, in those very, very early, months of life, I struggled, I would imagine. I can intellectualise it now as, feeling like I had any safety and anything to attach to. And then along comes the man I now call Dad. It's like glom onto him and, and off we go sort of thing. So
gave you that. What was school like for you in that area?
The thing that was difficult about school is that I was one of the smart kids, and I loved learning, and my dad was very supportive of that. He kind of really brought out the natural philosopher in me.
Right.
So I always had a very curious brain. I mean, kids are curious anyway, but that was fostered in me, and. That doesn't go down well in places like Mount Druitt. You're nerdy, you're this, you're that, you're weird. There was also the art aspect has always been there as part of life.
You were drawn to creative outlets?
Yeah.
As a way to maybe shelter yourself from social ridicule and angst?
I think it was just a way to kind of... a little bit of escapism, I suppose, but just, I just mostly doodled and just kind of did, whatever felt right. And I would sort of like come up with a motif and then just do it endlessly until I got bored with it and then, find something else to do. It was just a way to occupy and just distract, I think.
Yeah.
The other thing too, though, was because I was also a little bit sporty. So I was too nerdy for the sporty cool kids, and I was too sporty for the nerdy kids, and then I wasn't one of the pretty girls. So I didn't fit into that crowd. So, however I tried to find my little tribe, I never quite fit. Yeah.
How long did that feeling sit with you, that feeling of not fitting? Like, did it travel with you into your adulthood?
Yeah, pretty much.
Really?
Pretty much, yeah. And so I think, life really has been, about making my peace with that. And I think a lot of it actually comes from a place of non-acceptance of self. You know, that fundamental relationship with yourself. You know, if you don't have that really strong sense of self, connection to self-safety within yourself, how do you have that with other people? Yeah.
If I hope this isn't too personal, but how did that impact on parenting as you got older? Because you mentioned you're a mother.
Yes, yeah. So I have a son. He's 29 now. Oh, well, 29 in June, so
Yeah.
almost. And I was a young mum at the time, so I was 23 when I had him. And one of the things that I set out to do from the very beginning was to be better than my mum, if I can put it that way.
Every parent does. That was my motivation.
Yeah.
I think I blew it. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. Keira.
Yeah, no. Well, I think none of us do it perfectly. That's for sure. You know,
No,
we're all going to make our mistakes.
Yes,
Yeah.
but you felt that was a motivator. You're like, I want to.
Yeah, so I was trying to be a very deliberate parent and not throw away the good things about my mum, because there were good things, and it's taken me a while to acknowledge them, but to also not do the things that were so hurtful to me, and do better by my son in that regard. Yeah.
Wow. It's a pretty conscious approach.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I describe it. Very deliberate, very conscious, very reflective.
It's like you intellectualized it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
You might be able to notice I'm profiling you now because you're an advocate for psychedelics.
Yeah, yeah.
And I guess in my journey of learning in this space, because I'm very curious by it as well, I am coming in the path of very academic and intellectually savvy humans that are also drawn to it.
Yep.
You know, but I guess, would you say that your experiences with psychedelics have healed and filled that hole that you mentioned within you?
They've certainly played a part. Eventually, they came into my life quite late.
Okay.
So I think it was about 46 when I had my first. It was an MDA. MDMA was the first experience, so quasi-psychedelic, I suppose you could say.
Quasi-psychedelic?
Yeah, because a lot of people sort of dispute whether they're actually a true psychedelic or not.
Well, should we get Mark? let's get Mark to weigh in. Like, let's define a psychedelic. Like, do you have to be hallucinating to be having a psychedelic experience, or are hallucinations a myth of psychedelics?
Yeah, I think hallucination is probably a misnomer. I think we can kind of let that go. As far as I feel, there's two parts of me here. One feels very precious about what psychedelics are, and one part of me says that MDMA is not a psychedelic. It's in the literature they call it an entactogen or empathogen, but it's certainly a very important tool in psychedelic assisted therapy, and it has these qualities and attributes that are so important at allowing a person to come into contact with what they might feel is their true self or their authentic self, undefended from parts of them that might be critical, undefended from self-loathing, in a real openness that really promotes this kind of very natural, compassionate openness to others, a generosity to self, a clear seeing, a kind of an expansive view where you can look at your whole life, your life in relationship to others, and have a lot of humility, a lot of grace. So they're a very important tool, whether used in the psychedelic assisted therapy space or used in other spaces that Mel was kind of pointing towards.
Well, so other spaces like what? Like a party?
Some people have. Part of the work I do as a psychologist is help people explore their lives, and people have experiences with different compounds and whether drugs or other experiences where they have turning points and they come into contact with these moments that define them. A lot of people know Sam Harris as a neuroscientist and meditation teacher and podcaster, a very famous guy from America, and he credits his journey into meditation, a 10-year deep journey into meditation, 2 years of which was spent in silent retreat and went to Nepal and all the rest, did the whole thing, with an experience at 18 or 19 with a friend of his sitting on a couch in a basement. They both took MDMA, and he came into contact with this loving, open space, this deep loving kindness that made him realise that there's something there. He tried meditation before. He's like, what's the point? What is this? And It wasn't until he had that experience, and he didn't pursue any psychedelics from there or any other MDMA. He just realised there was a way of being that was possible, and then dropped into a 10-year kind of exploration from a mindfulness perspective. So it can open up portals like that. And on the other side, people can just use it as a party drug and have good experiences, bad experiences, and all the rest of it. It's the drug's not the point really. It's what can be opened up by that kind of tool, of which there are others. We can talk about other. When I think about psychedelics, I don't just think about compounds. Psychedelic, I guess the definition is mind manifesting, and if we think about mind, we might think of the mind of the universe as much as the mind of the individual. So we can talk about other methods that can help that.
You mentioned, it can open up a portal, and one of my questions, I actually wrote this down, was, what are these compounds doing that other more traditional compounds used for, mental illness treatments are not doing? And I guess you've answered it, but is the big difference, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it compared to, say, a sedative for someone who is suffering from bipolar or manic depression or whatever? Is it eliciting would you say a spiritual experience as opposed to more of what the other ones are doing is just a numbing experience or physical experience? Yeah,
broadly speaking, the medications that are used at the moment are about protecting a person from sensory experience, somatic experience, what we might think of as symptoms.
Yes.
They're a buffering agent, very important part of mental health treatment, really helpful for some people. Probably not ever supposed to be used long term for people. They're a very important tool. For some people they do need them long term. I'm not anti-medication at all. I'm pro-medication. I think it's an important part of how we can help people. But they're primarily, and I'm speaking in a very general term here because there's lots of different kind of medications, but generally to buffer someone from their own experience and to constrict their contact with their inner experience, their sensory experience. Psychedelics do the opposite. They open the valve, so to speak. They increase sensitivity, they amplify what's in the body and the mind and the spirit. They amplify connection to the world, to relationships. And in that amplification, you can imagine that could be very rich, very enlightening, very opening, spiritual in a very connective way.
Painful.
Very painful, and disturbing and distracting and unsettling. And the things they can open up are then ripe fruit for someone to actually be able to work with. But if someone's not prepared for that, this stuff will show up, and then what? And so in that way they can be, unsettling at best and dangerous at worst. So, what our medical system's going to have a hard time, and our therapy system and our cultural healing system's going to have a hard time understanding or making sense of, is that these compounds are very different to the compounds that we're used to. One is about buffering and shutting down. One is about opening up and expanding and amplifying. So that's a huge paradigm shift, and one we need to understand. And that's why we talk about psychedelic-assisted therapy. The therapy component is, most of it.
Right, and it's a small piece of the jigsaw puzzle, of the big picture.
Uh-huh.
It's not an instantaneous cure. I'm sure that's something you want to promote as well, Melissa.
Well, because I think something that I'd add to that too, it's about an entire paradigm shift in terms of how we think about healing and who's actually doing the healing and how does it take place. Because, sort of the Western biomedical model is very much, well, I'm the therapist, I'm the expert, here's what you need, here's your prescription, you just do this, you'll be fine. It's quite a passive way for a person to be receiving so-called healing. And I think that's sometimes it's, as Mark said, we need those structures in place, we need the medicines, we need that sort of controlled and structured approach for people because that's what they need at that time. But I think we also need to be really mindful that ultimately we're all our own healers. We all know ourselves best. And sometimes we need help finding ourselves, finding our way back to ourselves, for sure. But we need to be mindful of that moment when the person does come into themselves enough to go, yeah, I got this. I still need some help, but here's what I need, you and the universe and whatever, to bring to me in order to keep healing. And that might be a pill. It might be, hikes in nature. It might be, it's so individual,
Sounds empowering.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel empowered after an experience? Actually, no, I'm going to reframe that question.
Okay, yep.
Do you feel empowered now?
Completely.
In your life?
Yes, completely.
Rad.
For a number of reasons, and psychedelics are definitely a part of that. I think for me personally, they've helped me just in the really kind of like work through some of the embodied stuff that I've struggled with in the past. So intellectually, I've never had a problem, and probably I've been too intellectual, too cerebral, and not lived enough of my earlier life in my body. And that was fine. That was interesting. That served its purpose. But it's through coming back into my body through the use of the MDMA, and then the second experience was an LSD experience. And both of those things really helped me just connect with that presence, that whatever it is that comes through, to make me feel, I guess, more complete, more myself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think like people that are just taking these compounds off their own volition are losing the experience of it because they're not following it up with therapy?
I think that's really depends. That really depends on the person. What are they taking it for? How much time do they spend thinking about that sort of stuff anyway?
Yeah.
Does a drug experience cause them to think about it in ways that they'd never stopped to think about it before? Are they even seeking it for that kind of thing? So I think that's the answer to that is as individual as the person, taking the drugs.
I want to add sort of maybe an analogy of a bushwalk here too. So it's not just what happens after, but it's the presence we bring to it. We've all been on bushwalks where we're with friends and buddies and we're chatting and, talking about stuff and connecting, and we get to the end of the bushwalk and we haven't actually really experienced, the rainforest. We haven't really looked around. We haven't really listened. We haven't really participated. And we might have had experiences of the opposite where we stop and we feel that sunshine and we hear birds and we connect with the kind of the dampness, and so there's something about any experience, including psychedelic experiences, where if we bring a particular intention and presence to it, we can participate and reciprocate in a way that's so much different. Whereas many people might take them at a party or a festival or whatever and just be doing their thing without paying attention. So that awareness is really important. That's why intention setting and the preparation is such an important component. We want to go in with a kind of an orientation or a navigation or a kind of a compass. And also we want to go in with some skills about paying attention, about noticing, about being in the body. And the body is probably the place for most people, the place of healing and opportunity that has not really been explored yet, as Mel was saying.
So you're saying, when I took LSD at the big day out in 1996, watching The Prodigy, and then thought they were the most evil things on the planet and they were after me, and I had to run over to Moore Park and sit under a fig tree for 5 hours.
Yeah.
I don't know. Not a positive thing to do.
Well, maybe, and I would imagine if you had have had good support in Moore Park, that fig tree might have been a beautiful experience.
But okay, like I'm joking, Sammy, I'm making light of it, but I must admit I was just drawn to nature. Why do you think that's a component of these compounds? Because it seems like a commonality, a common theme.
Because we belong, we come from, we are.
Because we are nature.
Yep.
And we desire it and we long for it.
Yep.
I think that's what, how long have you been a psychologist for? Practicing?
About 18 years.
And when I turned up here today, I was like, how's things, man? And you're like, busy, And, is it because, you probably have a revolving door, you've seen the themes and the trends and the recurring issues. Do you think could fundamentally come down to like a lot of we're just disconnected from nature, our natural environment. You know, do you think that drives a lot of misery? I mean, is that too broad?
It's such a big question. People sometimes ask me, you know, why? What's happening at the moment? Why do we have so many people that want and need help with mental health, with well-being? It's such a multifactorial kind of answer, and no one really knows the full extent to the contributing factors. But disconnection with a natural way of life is certainly one of them, and the rhythms of life too. You know, we don't even are not even really connected to winter and summer and spring and autumn and hibernating and re-emerging, and you know, where everything is focused towards comfort and we can have anything we want at any time. You know, that's speaking for people who aren't living in disadvantage. But I think this level of there's a great book called Comfort Crisis, which I was really inspired by. And
You read it?
Yeah, I have.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's, you know, when we're able to reach for warmth and food and all these beautiful things, which are a kind of a privilege of the society we live in, they actually take us away from the sort of challenges that neurobiologically and spiritually we're probably not just equipped for, but we kind of need. You and I were speaking before we started recording about fire and about grappling and about cold and about challenge, you know, and we need that ongoing.
Yes,
I think
sir.
without that, you know, we really shrivel a little bit. Too much comfort's a bad thing.
Yes. It's interesting. I feel really good in myself. Maybe the best I've ever felt mentally, which is on the back of what I consider a really traumatic experience or experiences over the last few years, you know, as a lot of people have experienced to varying degrees, especially on the back of the, I don't like to say the word, but the lockdown situation that we all endured. And I'm wondering, I'm like, why do I feel so good and so content? And when I was going through these difficult experiences, I really lent in to challenge. So I lent into, I just went, initially it was like, I'm going to just physically exercise to the point of oblivion, which was probably not healthy to a degree, but I was like, it's the best, that's all I can do right now. And it was working. And then that evolved into, you know, participating in, what did you call it? Compassionately violent activities like MMA and then jiu-jitsu. And I'm blown away at the meditation and what that does for me mentally.
Yeah.
And then on the back of skateboarding, which I just adore, but it's so hard. Skateboarding, you're always hurting yourself. You spend most of your time falling over. You know, but then that you have this one moment where you land a trick, and that would take less than a second, but you spent hours to achieve that 1 second. And I just crave it. So then you've mentioned it as well. I think it's really a good point.
Yeah, and you know, everybody needs to kind of find, I think, their method of self-challenge. You can't prescribe that to somebody. You can introduce people to opportunities, and here's what, you know, other people might find helpful, but it's so unique, you know. And coming back to psychedelics, just to sort of draw a link there, you know, these experiences, if done well, and we can talk about what goes into doing something maybe well, is that they're very challenging, and I want to make sure people have the information about that, because people read a lot of, I guess, the hype or the excitement at the moment, and they feel like there's going to be these states of awe and bliss and relief. Now, that can only be earned.
Melissa's just like, no.
Not necessarily.
Yeah,
Well, they
hard.
do come, but you
yeah.
have to earn them.
Yeah.
And
Gotcha.
you have to show up for them.
Yes.
And you have to go through quite an ordeal before you will merge into those spaces. And if you go into a high-dose psychedelic experience like they use in clinical trials and psychedelic-assisted therapy, and you back away and avoid and try to run from that, you will get stuck in the suffering. And part of the skill set and the preparation is to open up to that, to turn into that, to face fear. And it's a big ask, you know, and I don't want people to feel like they can sidestep that responsibility. It's a beautiful thing, and I do warn against people just taking these substances in their own lives and thinking that that's going to kind of be a really beautiful kind of relaxing experience, and sometimes it can be, so I don't want to pretend that doesn't occur naturally as well, but often there's an ordeal.
Where do you guys stand with microdosing?
I guess I'm a little bit on the fence. I kind of, I don't dismiss it because I don't. First of all, I probably don't know like a huge amount about it, and I've never tried it, so I don't have that first-hand experience to speak from. It's a really difficult thing to study, scientifically. So the research is going to continue to be, a bit ambivalent, and if we may not find anything really useful out of that. But I also come at it from the perspective, again, of if this is something that people try and feel that it helps them, that's their method of accessing a healing modality that works for them.
Wow.
So, that's what they do and that's what works. Yeah.
Oh, I love that approach. That's a bit of a new... Okay.
I also just want to add, I guess part of me has a harm minimisation or harm reduction wheelbarrow to push, and I sort of wanted to just add to that. Many people think microdosing is a kind of a non-risk approach. And in some ways it is a very low-risk approach. But, I do talk to many people who have very, very low, microdosing kind of dosages and come into contact with very difficult emotional experiences.
Whilst microdosing?
Yeah. And so it can relax. While some people feel like it relaxes their kind of chattering mind and the busyness and everything like that, sometimes that opens people up into sort of beauty and connection and relief. And sometimes it opens them up to what's just underneath that, which might be shame, or it might be feelings of anger, or other feelings that might show up, grief. And just to know that in that way they can be powerful. They are amplifiers still. And so just to kind of really allow for that broad array of experiences people might have.
So potentially they could reinforce those negative thought patterns?
Not so much, just that they might relax. Those negative thought patterns can be seen sometimes as a protector of feeling what's in the body. And so rumination takes us out of experiences of emotionality and of emotional pain, emotional understanding. So this is not a bad thing. Again, you might come into contact with a micro ordeal with a microdose. Now that can be a really good thing, but just want to let people know that it's not just take a microdose and see sparkles.
But a micro ordeal.
Yeah.
Is an ordeal a part of the psychedelic experience? Hopefully. A macro experience? Hopefully.
Yeah.
I think it's actually just part of the human experience that we're accessing through psychedelics. Yeah.
That's it. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Is it just basically highlighting the fact that a lot of humans are running away from the ordeal? And that's why they're not progressing and developing.
The ordeal within them.
Within. Yes.
We're not advocating for people to come into contact on purpose with, chaos and conflict and all that kind of stuff. But that just happens anyway. Life just does that. But it's the ordeal within that's unattended to.
Interesting. Yeah. One of my past guests, Jarrett Wilbraham, I love him.
I love that podcast, by the way.
Thank you.
I thought
Do
it
you?
was really impressive. I loved his story and his approach and his psychology and yeah.
You did. He'd love to hear that. He's a young guy, he's 30, a professional MMA fighter, but, he relates deeply traumatic experiences in his childhood and then through his teens, through violence, just sheer violence. And, just by default discovered psychedelics. But, he then wasn't silly about it. He delved into, and understood very quickly that this is consciously a way to heal and did do it in a very smart way. But he definitely talks about, he's like, when I take psychedelics now, I'm not excited. I'm like, okay, here we go. This is going to be hard, let's go. But he leans into it, and you speak to him, he's the most calm, gentle, and just like a deeply empathetic human.
Yeah.
And remember, this is someone that literally just knocks people out. Like he's, in the octagon, he's amazing to watch, mesmerizing, like a complete warrior, like almost like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like merciless, but only in that space. Because he's intellectualized it, because, well, that's the job I have to do in there, but outside. And now he's a support for his family, his parents, and he contributed to psychedelics, and that's why I'm curious. So I don't care who answers this. Like, let's say for someone who is very curious about going on this journey because they may feel like they've had traumatic experiences. And, I mean, let's face it, childhood trauma drives so much anguish in our society. And it seems like the real common theme that these compounds work the best for. But, what advice would you give to someone who'd like to embark on this journey in the appropriate way, but also given that it's now accessible therapeutically? Big question.
It is a big question. I mean, yeah, it's not going to be accessible legally for many people for many, many years yet. So people are still facing the choice of having what's still an illegal experience by and large if they're going to try and use these medicines, compounds, whatever you want to call them. I guess from my perspective, I think some of the wisest advice that I've sort of heard talked about in the space is trust yourself. If you have any doubts, don't do it.
Interesting.
So just listen to what you're telling yourself. And and if you feel like you're driving yourself towards having an experience, why are you pushing so hard for that? Pay attention to the signals that are coming back to you. Like if you're trying to find an experience and you just can't find, the person or the drug or whatnot, maybe just relax for a little while and let it come and find you, because maybe you're not in the right space for it.
That's such a good call.
Yeah.
But what if they want to do an MDMA therapy session with a psychiatrist? That's legal now in Australia, right?
Yeah, well,
right?
Let's talk a little bit about, there's a lot of excitement that's coming and is here, and 1st of July is the date. So we'll talk about what's here and what's not, because I think there's hope here, and we need to be patient with what's actually accessible. So the Therapeutic Goods Administration has given the green light for MDMA-assisted therapy to be used with post-traumatic stress disorder, and for psilocybin-assisted therapy to be used with treatment-resistant depression. So that's important because they're the only 2 conditions that have been approved at this point for those particular therapies.
So you have to be able to prove that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not only that, the psychiatrist themselves has to go through a fairly strenuous administration process. The psychiatrist has to get approval through a human research ethics committee. So they have to provide kind of pretty comprehensive paperwork about why the person's eligible, what's been previously tried. They have to show that they've tried previously treatments that have been already approved. They have to sort of exhausted their other options. They have to describe the treatment paradigm, the therapists that are going to be helpful, the preparation sessions, the integration sessions, where it's going to happen, the facility, the set and setting. There's quite a lot into that. They also have to know how they're going to source the material. Australia doesn't have any facilities that produce either medical grade MDMA or psilocybin. It has to be imported from Europe or North America. That's a process through the Office for Drug Control. There's paperwork there. You can imagine there's importing licenses. Then they have to get approval through the TGA themselves with all of that to get approved as an approved prescriber scheme, it's called. They have to go through this scheme. So that's fairly arduous.
Sounds it.
And probably costly because the psychiatrist is driving all this. The psychiatrist or the facility is going to pass on the cost to probably the patient. And then from there, we're looking at a medicine session that's, with MDMA-assisted therapies up to 8 hours. The preparation sessions, we're looking at 2 or 3 or 4 hours there. And we're looking at a whole bunch of integration sessions after that. So if you look at the cost, we're looking at upwards of $10,000. Some people are saying $20,000 for a session. Now, not only is this going to be not very accessible because it's going to be hard to get people through, and they're going to have a long-term relationship with the psychiatrist already, and they're going to have tried everything already. who's going to have that kind of money? So at the moment, I just want to sort of really dial down the kind of the hope of some people that feel like they can get access to this. This is the very first step. What this is going to allow is the infrastructure of Australia to catch up. It's going to allow the clinical protocols to be kind of published and agreed to. There's an association forming, the Australian Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Practitioners, that many of my colleagues are putting together. They want to bring credentialing to this, a level of professionalism. They want to bring, agreed protocols, a source of information for government and for prescribing bodies. So the level of infrastructure is building at the moment in response to this. So it's a good thing. It's pulled the trigger on something that's made a lot of well-informed and well-intentioned people really coalesce to make this happen. I would say, several years down the track, as Mel said, we're going to be seeing probably better accessibility in the legal space, but that's where it's at the moment.
And listening to that, I'm thinking, is this, potentially going to, birth a whole new wave of people touting themselves as neo-shaman, and
that's
people
already happening.
Okay, yeah. So, are people going to just be driven underground?
That's happening now. Yeah.
Is that is that a concern?
It is for me because what's happened in this appetite for a different way of healing and also some of the hype around psychedelics and frankly some of the positive results that people talk about. Real people have had real results already. Just in the underground or through self therapy, and people are inspired by that. They want relief. They want healing. That drives a certain business model. And at the moment, the business model is underground therapy because there is no other option. And so there's a lot of good underground therapy likely happening. There's some stuff that's probably dodgy, and there's some stuff that's quite dangerous. And
well, how does underground therapy get a reputation as being good underground therapy? I mean,
word of mouth.
It just has to be word of mouth.
Yeah, that's all there is at the moment. And what I'm not so worried about the compounds themselves, the psychedelics or whatever people choose.
Interesting, because that was one of my questions. I was going to say to you, are these medicines dangerous?
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about that. But I just want to say that I'm more worried about the human factor. It's always humans that hurt humans. Mm-hmm. And I'm worried about sexual assault. Mm-hmm. I'm worried about coercion. I'm worried about people being, abused in certain ways by practitioners that are drawn to this. Mm-hmm. You always, there's like bees to honey.
Predators?
Predators are it's always like bees to honey. They come to these vulnerable spaces where vulnerable people are going to be, and they can easily enter positions of power. So that paranoia on my part is through 18 years as a psychologist and hearing what can happen, how humans can treat each other. I have to accentuate that this is a very small percentage of the population. I really don't want to cast negative aspersions on underground therapy, underground therapists. By and large, they're well-intentioned people, probably highly trained, doing really good work, without speaking for anyone in particular. But I'm worried about the human element and people. So when I talk to people about preparation, it's as much about being savvy and about not being naive and about getting the right supports and friendships and asking the right questions before someone might sign up to open up to a kind of a guided experience.
Because I think for me that's one of the things that the hype that's going on at the moment really focuses on the pill and not the person, and like the pill is almost by the by. Yeah, as Mark's saying, it's the people in the space that are the therapy really, and the pill just facilitates that to happen. That
seems like a common theme that you're really pushing today. And I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like this, you're sort of pushing like personal accountability, but also personal empowerment and belief in yourself that you can heal yourself.
Yes.
Like, are you sort of saying like, no one really knows you as well as you?
I don't think anybody else can know you as well as you. I don't think that's possible. And I do think that, sort of culturally we sort of move ever further away from personal responsibility. We want the government to fix all of our problems. We want somebody else to pay for it. We want, people to open the doors for us, that kind of stuff. There's kind of those expectations that, incrementally, take us further and further away from, I actually have agency, and I have incredible agency in my own life and my own experience, starting with how I think and see, and act in the world, like right here, right now, every minute. And I think that's, personally for me, I think that's one of the things, Mark was talking about, disconnection. And I think disconnection from self, disconnection from other, disconnection from nature, all of this sort of stuff, is driving us down this path of, what can I do? And I think that's why I really sort of think, and I don't want to get into the whole, like, it's not about, you did it to yourself, none of the victim blaming or shaming, all that. So, like, I think that's nonsense too. But just more people coming into a really deep and powerful understanding of who we each are and what we're capable of. And growing into that, like, it's not like, get over yourself, pull up your socks, sort yourself out. It's got like, no, it's about finding, safe and gentle ways to grow into who we actually are. And that's, to me, that's what life is. That's what the journey of life is.
Safe and gentle ways to grow into who we are. I mean, you've had some amazing psychedelic experiences that you feel like have helped on that journey as part of a small piece of the puzzle.
Yep.
I mean, are you still called to them, or do you think you've had the outcome that you were maybe desiring?
I think for me personally, I'm certainly not keen to have my next one sort of thing.
Okay.
And maybe that's different for everybody. I take a bit more of a okay, I've had this experience, let's just sit with it, let's just learn from it, what am I going to change, what has changed in my life as a result of it, and then I just trust that at some point in time, if I need another experience, well, that's what will come to me.
Like it's another tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, totally, because I think there's so many tools out there. That's the other thing that I'm really kind of like, kind of keen to get the message across in it. All of those tools, there's all of the things, that people know, like, we'll get good sleep, exercise, millions of different ways to exercise. And probably I've been shifting away from that, even though I've recently become an exercise physiologist. I think it's just move, move your body, be in your body, move your body, move it in ways that bring you peace, passion, enjoyment, joy, all that kind of stuff, whatever that is, whether it's, skateboarding or, compassionate violence, or sitting at... I love that phrase. It's going to be my new thing for a while, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Jiu Jitsu.
Yeah.
BJJ. If I get nothing out of this today, I'll get that compassionate violence. That's the best call, dude. And that's what I find interesting. I've always found interesting about you over the years. You're an interesting paradox to me, because... psychologist, I see you as someone very smart, intellectual and well-spoken, and there's a real calmness about you, gentle. But I've seen you in the boxing gym, man, and you're punching the shit out of that bag, man, and you're getting after it.
Yeah.
And now you're choking people out.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And getting choked out. It's such a humbling experience. Like, I think, talk about challenge, every day, or as much as my body can handle actually at 45, but... You go to these gyms and you get humbled by people who have been training longer than you, and they might be smaller than you, weaker than you, shorter than you, younger than you, anything. And if they're more trained, they humble you so deeply. It's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And there's this real respect in those places, and this idea of getting someone close to kind of a serious injury or death, and then being able to tap, and the person with so much gentleness unravels from you and allows you to then you talk about it and you bond about that, and they even show you what they did and you review it together, and then you go again. Yeah, it's so beautiful. Yeah, like you definitely have like an ego death. Oh yeah, like 20 ego deaths a night. It's really good for you. How do you feel about dancing on that
that line of possible passing out?
When I started, I tried to dance in the line because I thought I still had my ego.
Because that was the ego,
I can muscle my way through this.
Yeah.
And now I just tap. Because,
When you know that you're in a compromising position, you can't get out.
Yeah, and I've learned to respect the injury game, and if you take your way all the way to the end, I haven't done much. I've only been in one competition, so I haven't. That's a different.
Have you?
Yeah,
You actually competed?
just once. Yeah, so but that's a different level. That's where you do take yourself all the way to the end. So
Okay.
when you're rolling, you're there to train, continuously and train the next day and the next day and the next day. So I've learnt to really, when you know you're done, and just let go.
Yeah. Yeah, it does highlight the ego, like the people that won't tap. Like, they say tap or nap. I mean, I was doing it in the early stages too. I was like, I'm not tapping, I don't tap. I never give up. But it's like, really, there's no way out of that, and I had a couple of moments where, vision got blurry. I was like, what am I, no.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had a headache for the rest of the night. That was only once, but...
And arm bars too, and sort of leg locks and stuff. You tap and get out of there, because what are you going to do?
Yeah,
Just
snap
break your
your
leg.
arm.
Yeah.
What belt are you?
I just got my blue belt.
Congratulations, dude.
Yeah,
That's no joke now.
Yeah, they
to
say
get to
that
a
it's
blue belt
that's
is...
where you start, and I really
Yeah.
feel that's true.
Yeah.
I feel like now I can start to learn.
Yes.
And I feel like I've got to earn my blue belt now.
To prove it.
Yeah, just to myself, to nobody else. No one else cares. It's you and yourself and your own growth, and what Mel was saying about that, safe and gentle way, which I think jiu-jitsu is, but also the challenge that we talked about has that paradox built into it.
Yeah, and I think I see it as, it's a martial art. I think it's a black art as well. Like it can never be perfected. It's always, Yeah, so. You're an artist.
Yes.
What's your medium?
Oh, I don't really limit myself.
Oh, you're the best. Who are you?
Yeah. At the moment I'm focusing on oil paintings.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sort of some kind of like sculptural type stuff that's just with found objects. Yep.
Interesting.
So, yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying at the minute.
So tell us about the sporulation. Is it the sporulation?
Sporulation.
Sporulation Art Festival. Tell us about it. What is it?
So it started out as an idea when we were doing the Mind Medicine Australia stuff. We were sort of coming up with ways to have like raising awareness and sort of like type events. And one of the things that I had in the back of my mind was to have an art show. Like, how cool would it be to have an art show and do psychedelic art and, and all that kind of stuff. And maybe we could make it a fundraiser because all the art could be for sale to, raise funds, that sort of stuff. And that was kind of under the auspices of doing it as a Mind Medicine Australia event. And long story short, it was happening in the context of the pandemic and the lockdowns, and it just didn't happen.
Okay.
But I had a group of artists. And, sort of 6 months down the track, I just went, oh, hey, why don't we just do it anyway? And let's call it sporulation, and let's go. And
excuse my ignorance. Can you tell us what that word means?
Sporulation, yeah. So it's kind of like, it's not just fungi that do it, bacteria do it and whatnot, but that's their way of reproducing.
I didn't know.
So instead of seeds, they produce spores.
Spores.
And then they release.
I got it. Spore.
So the act of sporulation is the release of spores,
that
which
makes
is
sense.
Packets of fungal DNA that go off and take hold somewhere else. And so that's part of the idea. Yeah, well, it's a great word because everybody goes, sporulation, what is that? Automatically getting people, wanting to know more and find out more. So it's been really quite a good term from that perspective, but also just conceptually as well. The whole idea behind the show did start out in support of psychedelics in that kind of really broad sense. And as it's developed, so we did the first one last year and then we're just about to go into the second one in opening night on the 21st of April.
Cool.
It's broadening out into let's just have interesting conversations and do interesting things and make interesting art about the sorts of stuff that we don't necessarily talk about, a lot. And the psychedelics are always going to be a part of that because that's what I really want to raise awareness of. But for instance, this year the theme is psychedelics and death. how do they go together? People don't have conversations about psychedelics. They don't have them about death. Well, let's just put two together and, go for it, sort of thing. And we're sort of looking at death not just in, because there's the whole, there's a research study underway in Australia already about using psilocybin for people experiencing end-of-life anxiety. That's happening down at Melbourne St Vincent's. And they're actually going to be releasing their results, I think, probably next year. Be getting ready to sort of wrap up their results. So there's, that's a really literal, well, there's your psychedelics and your death happening. But it's also around, sort of metaphorical death, the role of fungi in the life cycle, in terms of, they're the decomposers of dead things.
Yeah.
But through that decomposition comes new life, those kinds of things. So really the whole idea behind the show is it's a little show at the minute, but I want to grow it into something that actually becomes you would call it a full-blown festival. Like, come down, experience the art, experience the workshops, get involved hands-on. So this year we've actually got, Mark and another colleague, Lani Roy, they're actually delivering a harm minimisation workshop, which is just brilliant, because that was always the aspiration, was to provide pathways for people to come and have these conversations, but then come and access things that they can, get involved in and take away, into their lives moving forward.
So where is it again, sorry?
So it's held here in Wollongong in a local community-based gallery called Project Contemporary Artspace.
It's next to the youth centre on Keira Street.
All right, and Mark sort of made me aware that you two will both be speaking there as well.
Yes.
So
the workshop that Mel mentioned is on the night of the 26th of April.
Okay.
So that's a 3-hour workshop on harm minimisation, preparation, integration, psychedelics, that kind of thing. But there's also a panel discussion on the 29th, the Saturday night.
Yes.
Mel will be on the panel. I'll be kind of just facilitating it, but we'll have other panel guests there and, opening up this rich topic of psychedelics and death and everything like that.
Yeah. That's pretty public. As a professional, how do you feel about your reputation and, I guess, being associated with the use of psychedelics?
Mixed. Yeah, it feels quite exposing in some ways, and also it feels just a natural evolution of where we're at as a culture. I feel like this realm of healing is so broad, and we need to open up to as many different ways as possible. And if we look at the anthropology of psychedelics, they've been used forever in human cultures. It's really only in the last 50 years that we've had some sort of issue with them, prohibition and legal stuff, and started with the Nixon government, and people know the history there. They can look it up in Michael Pollan's book, but psychedelics have been part of ritualistic practices, of coming of age practices, of spiritual practices forever. I mean, so for me, then it's, in a way, it's not controversial. It's just a coming around again. Okay. They're just kind of part of the fabric of how we make sense of this big, wide, crazy cosmos and what we do in it. So I just try to find the balance between just opening up to that as part of humanity and part of the range of tools that we have to kind of help. And also I want to bring the spiritual back into healthcare. Yes. And as an atheist, I say that as an atheist, or a recovering atheist, I call myself sometimes. A
recovering atheist? I think you said that when you were on the show last time.
I'm still in.
What does that mean?
I'm still in recovery.
So, you're spiritual. You're a spiritual person. I just know you are.
Yeah.
You don't believe in God, though? A God?
Not the kind of God that I grew up with. Not the kind of God that's described in the kind of culture that I grew up in, a Christian culture, Catholic culture.
So you don't identify with a religious denomination?
No.
What do you wait? So define your spirituality.
I did one of those, those pop psychology quizzes that tells you what religion. I did one of those the other time, and it came up, bang, I'm a Taoist. And I think I laughed my head off, but it's actually quite true. I'm very inspired by the Tao Te Ching, and I just have this sense of the great mystery. And I have this sense of the fabric of the cosmos, and when you go into some of these experiences, what many people describe, amongst the ordeal or after the ordeal, is this overwhelming love, this message that you are loved,
which
is so healing. To
Goosebumps
receive
when you said that.
Yeah, I'm getting emotional thinking about it, right? And feeling that. And to know you are loved is everything. And to be validated, it's the sweetest medicine. And so that, and you are loved by what? Like, wow. Like the mystery
You're loved
is
by
here.
what, sorry?
By what? Yeah. Who is this? What is this thing telling me that I'm loved?
Yeah.
So, sometimes people call that God. To me, that's not a term that I sort of utilise, but I think I've been nudged many times over the last, decade or so towards something bigger than just kind of a materialistic atheist viewpoint. There's something else, and I'm not a sort of crystals and incense guy. That's just not how I'm built. But yet I find myself...
Are you, Melissa?
Oh, nothing wrong with a little bit of crystals. And incense, but,
I love crystals. My daughter loves them.
Yeah, no, I love crystals. I'm just not
Yeah.
that sort of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I can't help but these, talking about different ways of healing. I've hurt my neck doing jiu-jitsu, right? So one of the entries into kind of transformation and healing is pain. So I've visited a local osteo, and she has a way of working that opens you up in this reciprocal relational experience, in this kind of liminal space, that the kinds of experiences that happen in psychedelics happen in the therapy room with this osteo. And this "you are loved" shows up in a big way, and it can allow these spaces to do a lot of self-work, a lot of internal compassion and connection work. And so I just want to highlight again where Mel was sort of pointing towards. It's not just psychedelics that can kind of open up these spaces of healing. There are many, many methods. And
Good call, brother.
and it's not the drugs or the medicines or the compounds that are these are the setting events for some natural healing intelligence that we have. And some people think there's a kind of a cosmic healing intelligence as well. I'm in two or three minds about that. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I don't think we ever will. But there's something in us that knows how to heal, and we want to create these places where we can come into contact with that. Psychedelics are one way to do that.
Yes, sir. Good message. Both of you, good messages with that. You must see it with your patients a lot. Just a lot of people who don't feel loved.
Yeah, self-love.
Is that the? Let's. Here's a really broad question. After all this time, helping people, is primarily a lot of it rooted in children that weren't loved properly.
The work that I do personally in therapy is adults who have come into contact with a need to experience themselves in the world differently. They've got to a certain age where all their ways of coping, of protecting, of defending, of getting by, of achieving, succeeding, they've found that those ways no longer serve them. And they know there's something else there, and they have a longing for that, and they're not sure what it is. And often there's these adverse childhood experiences, sometimes traumatic experiences, sometimes a lack of love, sometimes emotional neglect, sometimes just a lot of bad luck and rough disadvantage, sometimes bullying, lots of different things that form a person's personality. And it's more so a love of self and a generosity towards self that is the healing property.
Okay.
And that then opens people up to love from others.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that why they can't love others themselves, because they don't love themselves?
That's part of it,
Yeah.
and also receiving.
Because
connection.
then that then links to relationship breakdown, which is then this knock-on effect onto the children, and then the cycle continues.
Yeah. It's not their loving self that breaks up with another human. It's their protectors. It's the parts of them that defend against their own personal pain. If they can heal their internal, pain, then people don't get so activated and triggered in conflict, and they can see the other person for another human that's struggling as best they can and connect there. So,
Wow, I love that.
and sometimes that includes processing trauma, but often it's what people don't think of it as. It's more these tiny little moments strung together, hundreds and thousands of moments of not being seen, not being heard, not being felt, coming out of the body, forming ways like, you know, Mel said before, which is common to me too, this kind of intellectualizing, this coming out of the body. You know, we have all these experiences that take us out of the living, breathing body, and we form these defense patterns, these protective patterns, and, you know, sometimes people feel ready to kind of let those patterns relax, and that's a long journey.
Wow. Is that what, like, psychedelic, like, you know, they talk about neuroplasticity, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help? That can help with that, relaxing that?
Yeah, well, neuroplasticity, I mean, it's just a recognition that brains change. We used to think that brains only changed up to a certain age, but now we know that happens all the way through the lifespan.
Yeah.
And then what we do changes how our brain and our nervous system operates. And so there's certain things that promote positive neuroplasticity. And if we take a neuroscience view of psychedelics rather than a kind of more of a spiritual view, there's interesting science that people can look up around how classic psychedelics like psilocybin, like LSD, promote positive neuroplasticity in prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus and other areas of the brain.
Yeah.
And can actually be healing, being investigated for things like head injury, for dementia, for
we
Alzheimer's,
talked about that,
for cluster headaches. So used in a kind of a, you know, as a medical tool in a way, or a kind of a rehabilitation tool. So there's lots to find out in the research, and it's a sort of a small subset of research that's going to be emerging.
Wow, I love it. I'm gonna put you on the spot, Mel, because I read this on your flyer. What does multiplicity mean? I read that somewhere in regards to this space.
That's my stuff. Yeah.
Oh, is that your stuff? Yeah. What is multiplicity?
Yeah.
That was something you're going to talk about at the festival.
Yeah. I think Mel can relate, but
Sorry,
before
Mel.
I do that,
That's all right.
Because I'm like, what does that mean?
Is it multiplicity of self? Is that what you mean? Yeah, okay. Yeah, we are a community of selves.
Yeah, I've just got a burning thing I want to say before, but I can't relax until I say this next thing.
I don't want to piss you off.
No. I'm ready to roll.
Blue belt. Sorry, go.
We talked about, you know, is there harm in psychedelics? And I do want to acknowledge that there is harm for some people outside of the human element. As a harm minimization guy, I have to say this. So there are some people that should never take psychedelics. People who have a history of psychosis, people at the moment in research, they're not accepting people who have a family history of psychosis, even, you know, first or second. And people who have or in mania or might be triggered into mania.
Can we clarify that includes bipolar disorder?
Yeah, so interestingly, again, there's been some very early research being done. When people are in the depressive phase, it may be safe and may be helpful. When people are in the hypomanic or manic stage, it's not helpful. So that nuance is really being worked out. So at this point in time, I'd highly warn against people using psychedelics who have, you know, history of psychosis or mania, or even that being in their family. I'd be very careful about that. It can change lives and can have people turn a corner that they can't turn back. That's devastating. We don't want that to happen. So I'd be very careful about that. And again, I don't actually ever promote anyone take psychedelics. In this landscape at this time, you know, with the science that we have, I never tell a client that comes to me or anyone in the community, you should take psychedelics. So I really, you know, I don't have enough information, and we don't have enough information. That's me as a science practitioner, so I can't actually promote it. If people have decided that that's the way they're going to go, I provide them with as much care and support and preparation, integration as possible. But I don't promote it, so I want to get that message across. The other harm, just while I've got this, is that there's a drug interaction that can occur. If people are on psychotropic medications or antidepressants or antipsychotics or any medication whatsoever, there can be, like in any chemical compounds, there can be an interaction effect. Some of them can be quite dangerous, some can be deadly. So to be really careful about drug interactions as well.
Well said, sir. Very responsible. Thank you.
Can we just riff on the multiplicity thing
Yeah,
for a bit, though? Because
yeah.
that's fascinating to me.
I'm
Because,
fascinated.
yeah, well, I think because I've done some reading, and some of it comes straight out of the psychological literature, personality construct theory and stuff like that, where they take a constructivist approach to the personality, meaning that we're always, self-constructing ourselves, but we're not just one self, we are a multiplicity of selves. And some of the what could be seen as mental health problems stem from the fact that we orphan parts of ourselves in order to keep ourselves safe because they're not socially acceptable. So, yeah, I mean, that's a huge topic, and Mark and I haven't really explored that. So, like, I don't come at that from a practicing psychologist perspective. I come at that as somebody who thinks and philosophises about those sorts of things.
Curious.
But I think that's been one of my own that's been part of my own recent journey over the last few years is reconnecting with all of the selves that I've ignored or suppressed or abandoned or dismissed. And just loving that feeling of having that conversation with myself and feeling all of those different parts of myself. And that's part of where this kind of recent, experience of just being joyful and happy to be alive, it comes from that being with myself. And,
Wow. That's
again,
so cool to hear.
Yeah, the psychedelics have absolutely been part of what's got me there.
Part of.
Well, I think based on my own personal experience, I kind of feel that that's how we kind of already all are, and we lose our way in that through all sorts of things that happen to us in life from the day we're born. And I feel like I'm coming back to myself.
So you're okay being lonely?
I don't feel
Or
lonely.
don't feel lonely anymore?
I don't feel
Are
lonely.
you alone a lot?
Yeah, I live alone. I will have a cat. Yeah.
Yeah, cats do whatever they want, though. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, sometimes they do. Sometimes
Sorry.
they do. No, but look, yeah, that's an interesting point too. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely.
Yeah.
Big difference.
I think it drives so much. I think people are terrified of being alone.
Yeah.
Because then they're lonely.
Yeah.
But you know how I mentioned earlier, because I'm just really relating to what you're saying. Like I said, I feel really good at the moment.
Yeah.
I've just, the last sort of few months, I've spent large periods of time alone and went through like this really hard journey of, what were we calling it before? Ordeal of loneliness. And then it's like I've just come out of it, and now I'm really enjoying my own company. Yeah, and the loneliness is dissipating. It still pops up every now and then.
Yeah, I think sometimes I definitely feel, experience that as, I retreat into, I'm feeling very small. I'm feeling small, and that takes me right back to the roots of, where all of my, sort of childhood trauma and stuff comes from. And that's a real signal to me to slow down, to pay attention to what's happening in the whole, or who's taking care of me, who's looking out for me. I am, and this is what I need to do right now, and take care of myself. But when I'm sort of in the happier spaces, in those more joyful spaces, like it is literally like I haven't counted them lately, but I am literally just having all of these conversations with my different selves.
Yep.
And I talk to myself in that. So, what are we going to do today? And we're doing this and we're doing that. And it's so I don't actually feel alone. I actually feel, like I have company.
Yeah.
And that's sort of me just exploring, the different parts of myself. And sometimes that's about, doing the art thing. Sometimes it's about, doing the work thing, just any aspect of my life. Yeah. So that's why I'm kind of really interested in this whole multiplicity thing and about, is it something that potentially underpins what we, sometimes frame as a mental health issue? I mean, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah. Did you sort of embrace multiplicity just through your own experience and discovery, or did you get that through therapy or reading or psychedelics?
I think mostly through personal reflection, feeling that without understanding what it was until I started to read a bit about it. There's one book, An Invitation to Personal Construct Theory in particular, that really just laid it out brilliantly. I mean, a layperson could read it. It's written by academics, but suddenly that made sense. It's like, oh, yes, I see myself, there now. And then just, working with that idea and trying to find ways to, just really embrace that. And I think going back to the psychedelics, that really helps bring that sense of connection to all of the selves, but also that sense of wonderment as well that comes from being in that psychedelic state and just, being able to really enjoy, instead of feeling crazy, because it's like, oh, what's going on? There's, it's like, no, actually look at all of these and this is all me, and how cool is that?
So cool. Wow, you two are just such a pleasure. All right, so how are we feeling? I'm very aware of the fact that Mark's got a BJJ class he wants to get to.
No, I'm cool.
You okay?
Yeah. No, I've hurt my body enough this week. I'm chilling today.
Yeah, isn't that the best feeling?
Or something instead.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Connect with nature. Do you go by yourself?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. How often do you do that?
Probably once every 2 weeks. Yeah. I just go up the back of the mountain here in the escarpment and just wander around.
Yeah, like I said, I've recently moved away from Wollongong, and I after living here for many years, I miss that escarpment. You don't realise how much it's in your peripherals, and it has. I feel deeply connected to it as well. I used to just go walking in it when I was feeling down or whatever.
Yeah. COVID sort of brought me back to that, the
Did
lockdowns.
it?
Like I would go up there quite a bit, every second day or something. And it's actually mushroom season. It's autumn. When I say I don't mean psychedelics, I mean
they're everywhere.
It's autumn, and it's cool. So you can
Oh my
find these
God.
cool little gems.
Aren't they interesting?
So interesting. And I'm not a mycologist. I don't even know what the names are. I just love the
I'm the
delight.
same.
Yeah.
I'm the same. Like I'm an enthusiast of fungi. Like again, not just psychedelics, but like the mycelium network and the history behind that, and the fact that mushrooms breathe oxygen like humans. They don't expel oxygen and breathe in carbon dioxide. They do what we do.
Yeah.
And they're not a
interweb
plant
of the universe. They communicate everything, nutrients and information between trees and plants.
You've seen the documentary Fantastic Fungi, surely. I mean, obviously, and it talks about all types of mushrooms and mycologists and stuff like that. But I'm just curious on a fun note, like, what do you think of the stoned ape theory?
Yeah, Terence McKenna's my guy.
Is he?
Yeah, so of all the philosophers, so I'm a big Terence. Actually, when I tried Chat GPT for the first time,
You didn't try it?
All I did is type in, what would Terence say about this? What would Terence say about that?
I haven't tried it yet. I don't want to try it. I feel like
it's a bit of fun.
I feel like I'm selling out.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
The stoned ape theory,
Yeah.
Did you want me to quickly say a little bit about it? Or have you talked about it? In
Not
previous
really.
podcasts?
Like, break it down for everyone. Like, what's the premise behind the stoned ape theory? And then I want to hear what you think of it.
I mean, it's a cool theory, and who knows? So basically, there's an acceleration in human development and brain growth and civilization and creativity and tools, and there's this kind of accelerated period happen just kind of out of the blue, so to speak. And there's no kind of clear explanation about why all of a sudden we turned from these kind of not even hunter gatherers, but kind of just real kind of animals living in the forest. And Terence came up with this idea that as the landscape changed in Africa and the forests changed into sort of more savanna land and our sort of human monkey ancestors sort of came down from the trees, so to speak. Their role became more about kind of hunting rather than kind of being in the canopy, and so they would be following game, and part to do that is you follow their scat, and that's where mushrooms love. So you would have all these mushrooms come up in the scat of animals, and so naturally humans are curious. They're going to try things. They're going to be eating this, and so they develop this kind of ongoing relationship with psychedelic mushrooms. And psychedelic mushrooms have been found in every continent except Antarctica, so they are everywhere. Now, these kind of ancient ancestors must have had pretty, interesting experiences, as everybody does if they eat a bunch of mushrooms, and probably spiritual experiences, as one gets, a mystical experience. And from that, there's a lot of creativity that can come. People start thinking about things in much broader ways. And there's some interesting examples of people coming up with inventions and kind of scientific breakthroughs through psychedelics. But in the stoned ape theory, that this kind of relationship with mushrooms started creating a sense of religion, of cohesive kind of cultural, ethical kind of systems and relational systems, tools, technologies, and actually the neurogenesis and neural growth components actually contributed towards our, the growth of the human brain. And it was that kind of relationship with these psychedelic mushrooms that changed humanity from, just one of the other animals into this crazy specimen that we are now.
Yeah, like I think they talk about the development of language from it.
Yeah. So, what's the word when sort of emotions and language get caught up together? Alexithymia.
I've never heard that word.
Maybe that's the wrong word. We might edit that out if that's wrong.
I'll Google it. I'll Google that. Jamie, just look up the alexithymia.
Yeah, might mean something else. We'll see. But yeah, it's just, it's an interesting theory, and Terence came up with many, many interesting theories. So,
dude, that guy was an enlightened cat, wasn't he?
Oh yeah. When you hear a guy can riff on anthropology, pharmacology, philosophy, just all of that, and just weave it all in, you never know where he's going to go. He starts eating into the cheese, and you never know which side he's going to come out. He's a fascinating guy. It's a shame to not have him here now. He'd be the best commentator on what's happening.
Think so?
I think he'd keep the whole scene sober and on a kind of a compass. I think he'd be the kind of the wise, ethical voice of where we're headed.
Gotcha.
Especially as we move into a commercialised space as well.
I mean, either of you can answer this. Who are some sort of modern day commentators that you think are going to help this integration into our society or our culture? I mean, I know there's like people like Rick Doblin.
Yep.
And he comes up a lot. Paul Stamets. I don't know. Is there anyone else you think that is going to be of benefit?
There's so many voices coming into the space. It's really hard to pick one anymore.
Yeah.
Because there's all of, and I guess it depends on what angle you want to take too. Because then there's all of the researchers like Roland Griffiths.
Oh yeah.
Stanislav Grof, Robin Carhart Harris, Professor David Nutt. There's all of those kinds of
Comes up a lot.
voices. Yeah. And so they bring something to it from that very science-based perspective. And then you've got people like Roland Griffith, who's now having quite an interesting and very public experience of having been diagnosed with terminal illness.
Okay.
So he's end phase, and he's embraced that, and he's really, I think, putting a lot of stuff out there publicly in terms of, well, now I'm walking the path, and here's everything that I've learnt, and from the psychedelic research that he's been doing. And how he has just never felt more joyful or alive, even though he knows, his time is very
So it's
limited.
the end of life anxiety.
Yeah.
He's kind of like the grandfather of the very scientific method in psychedelics. So it brought a lot of credence to how we do science and research because he had that very, very mainstream background. And was able to bring the research back into mainstream culture through that reputation. And now his legacy is psychedelics for well people and spiritual growth. So he's moved from psychedelics for people with mental health problems and disorders and challenges into this other space. And he's kind of funded an institute that's coming out. So he's been looking at research into the interaction between meditation and psychedelics and long-term meditators and religious leaders and things like that, and peace and negotiation deals between different politicians and leaders. And so there's a whole realm here that's kind of emerging in our culture just naturally. It's being led by this kind of medicalisation of psychedelics push. We're a science-based kind of culture, I guess, and it feels safer to come in with a scientific method. But there's a much bigger arena occurring at the moment.
Yeah, it just feels like people are just really craving solutions because let's face it.
Yeah,
I don't know. The world just. I try to be optimistic. I'm one of those people that get really weighed down by the problems of the world, and I can default to this pessimistic view, like we're just completely screwed.
Yeah.
So it is great to know that there's people out there just looking for some alternative solutions, and I guess that's what drives me with the podcast as well a lot, is just to get people just having open dialogue, like hopefully what we're doing today, and that inspires people to think of different avenues and ways of doing things, So,
I think people are just craving solutions of love, respect, connection, and psychedelics are just a kind of exciting promise that might facilitate some of these things.
Yeah.
I don't want us to lose sight of the humanity here and what we're actually trying to do together, and almost take the limelight off psychedelics as the thing.
Gotcha. There's a bit of that going on.
There is,
There
yeah.
is.
And we just need to be careful that we
That's a
we
good message.
don't place all of our hope in them, and we don't place all of our blame towards or anything like that. They're boundary dissolvers, but it's the boundaries themselves that we should be interested in, and what comes together when we dissolve boundaries.
Oh, yes, good call. But I mean, you've both repeatedly said today that, it's life is work, life is pain. And I think for me, I'm taking away, it's just like lean into the pain, and work through it. And again, that's one avenue, but it's not the avenue. And it seems like you seem like both people that have done that in your lives outside of that, the psychedelic approach that we keep going on about, which inspires me more. I love seeing people, just walk through the fire, just walk through it and keep pushing.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, yeah. Anyway, how are we feeling? We had enough of me? I'm like, I feel like I want to get a coffee or something. I was saying to someone the other day, podcasts in the morning, I don't know, I usually struggle with it. Like I've learned, this is part of my journey, I've learned I have to be very gentle with myself in the mornings. And I used to think I was a morning person. I'd make myself get up early and I'd do me breath work and yoga and then go for a surf all by 6 a.m., But I'm like, no, I just don't want to do that anymore. I don't do that anymore. I go slow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sorry if I'm a bit out of it this morning.
No, that's good. I think there's way too much emphasis put on this kind of maybe masculinized, kind of agenderized, pushing, striving, achieving, going out and getting it,
Yeah, got to get after it.
That energy source is great, but can't we complement it with this kind of other sort of energy, which is this slowing down?
Because I think one of the things that I do now a lot in attending to the body is just noticing when it wants me to, could you just walk a little slower, please?
There you go.
I'll pull up in the driveway and instead of just that off keys, I'll race into the house. It's like I actually sometimes will sit I will just sit in my car in the driveway for 5 or 10 minutes, just feeling. Literally just feeling.
Yes.
And
Melissa, you're my kind of weird.
I don't know what the neighbours think of that, but they haven't said anything.
That's my main self-therapy tool.
Yeah.
Feeling the body, making as much room as to allowing and feeling into what's here.
Because I think we're programmed to go, go, go. So that's not the issue. The issue is feeling into slow. Yeah.
That's another good quote. No more go, go, go. It's slow.
Yeah.
Feeling the body. I mean, is that something you reinforce with your patients regularly?
Yeah.
Get them in their body?
One of the things we do continuously is to come back into the sensations of the body, the feeling of the body. One is a kind of a method of recognition of a natural mindfulness, but two, as Mel was saying, this multiplicity. There are parts of us, people-pleasing parts, self-critical parts, striving parts, all these different parts in us that. One that wants us to get up at 6 a.m, one that wants to sleep in. We're a multiplicity, right? And every part that we have has a kind of a signature in the body. And if we can recognise these parts, one way is the chatter that they give us, but the other way is how they show up in the body.
Gotcha.
And we can make a lot of peace with that, and we can make a lot of room with that. And as we validate them and recognise them, they'll relax naturally, and then we can talk to them literally, and we can live with them in a way that's more harmonious over time. We don't have to be at war with the self-critical part. We can find out about its history, about what it wants, about what it's afraid of, and we can help it.
Yes, dude. I think a lot of people just disconnect from their body. The body doesn't lie, does it?
No.
The mind does,
All the time.
but the body doesn't, right?
Never. Yeah. And the body is a place of fear for a lot of people, for a lot of reasons. And so part of the therapy that I promote is coming into a new relationship with that and finding out what's underneath that fear and learning to be with really difficult emotional and somatic experiences and not to move away from that, move away in forms of addiction, move away in forms of busyness, move away in forms of distraction, that we can just be with what's here, and it can be a hell of a ride. It can be an ordeal to do that. But there's a way to surf that, to navigate that, really.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, listen, it's been epic, and I think with the advent of the friggin' rave that's just started down in the cafe, speaking of psychedelic experience, I'm going to go down and choke that guy out. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think we might wrap it up, eh?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Thanks for the podcast. I really enjoy especially the local sports people, and especially the kind of MMA stuff. And you
You enjoy that?
I love that. Yeah.
Thanks, man.
I love to hear about people's internal processes and their psychology, about how they continuously show up to a very ordealing kind of way of being, especially in ordealing sport. To hear how they do that is so cool.
Oh, it's so nice to hear, because I went through a bit of a period where it was quite heavily MMA orientated.
Yeah, I enjoyed that.
And I copped a bit of shit for it, actually. But they're like, I thought you were a surfing and skating podcast. I've never said I'm those things either. And to clarify, this podcast is a space for storytelling, shared human experiences. And I guess for me, if I'm completely honest, it's a space for talk therapy.
Yeah.
You know, I think I've found my therapy through this. I really have. You know, and I actually really believe that I think it'd be a good tool for some people to have a conversation and tell their life story and record it and then listen to themselves in the third person. Because I have to do it all the time when I'm editing, and you start to pick up on these narratives that you create about things in your life and situations that aren't necessarily true, but you keep reinforcing them by telling the same story over and over, and then it changes a little bit to, you know, suit how you wanted it to go, and it's not true, and it's actually then inhibiting you and holding you back. And you know, and that's why I think this has been quite powerful for me. So anyone that's listening, congratulations, you're listening to my therapy. Well done.
Yeah. That's a great way to hear someone.
Yeah, I admit it. I remember Kelly Slater. This hurt me, man, because Kelly Slater is like, you know, a bit of an idol, iconic surfer. I've always liked him like everyone else because I like to surf. And he put a post up on Instagram once saying, "Oh, all these people with podcasts, like middle-aged men, doing their therapy session or something." And I was like, "Oh, that hurts," because he's right. Like, it is that, but I don't give a shit. I love it.
Yeah, but when do we make time to sit and talk in depth?
You're right, and I think what it does create a context. You know, And it makes you more accountable because you have a microphone as well, so you're more measured in what you say. So you're really considering what you're saying. And I think also it forces you to listen because you've got the headphones on, and so the voices are amplified. I think there's something to it, man.
There is, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's something to the pain that you feel when you hear stuff like that too. I think those are the interesting, oh, that hurts. Well, why does that hurt? You're going to learn something about yourself if you dig into that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure to meet you, Melissa. I really relate to the things you're saying and your journey as well.
Thank you.
I did want to sort of tap into your journey as a parent a little bit more, but maybe we can do that.
We can do it
another time.
Yeah.
So
There's a sporulation website.
yes,
as well.
Yeah. Tell us where to go.
So www.sporulation.online.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep. So it's So we that's one of the new things we got this year actually. So we've got our landing
Pro.
page. Yep. And so that will be a bit of a go-to portal over the years. You know, we'll sort of add resources to it and so on and so forth. So yeah, it'd be cool if people went and checked it out and came back to it from time to time.
Brilliant. And I'll put that link in this episode's show notes. So scroll down, click on it, see how you can be involved. All right. Well, Melissa Errey and Mark Baxter, everyone.